We've only had a few minor tech glitches today, and so I'm like, if this is our dark tech glitch, we can make this happen.
Yes.
Yeah, I am so excited to chat today, and we have so much to talk about. So before we get started, for those of you, I see a bunch of you joining now. Those that are just joining us, welcome to Vote Local Day 2020. We are here. We have made it to 507. And I am thrilled for this next conversation. Before we dig into the meat and potatoes, just a few housekeeping things. We are recording this, which you may have heard or seen when you jumped on. We are on camera. If you're an attendee, you are not on camera. So, that's cool. If you're at the bar watching football, doing what you need to do, we don't see it. You're here. That's all that matters. This is a nonpartisan event. Be the Ones is a nonpartisan organization. My name is Kate Mayer. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the founder and director of Be the Ones. And I am absolutely thrilled to be having this conversation today. You guys can do a much better job than I can. I'm gonna let you guys introduce yourselves. And Kareem, why don't we start with you?
So I am Kareem Moncree-Moffett, a current school board member elected November of 2021, and started my term in January of 2022. So I'm a newbie, and I am a proud alum of the first class of school board school, the class number 1. And so that's just a little bit about me, mom of 3, CPS graduates. I graduated from the University of Cincinnati a bunch of different times, so I've got a lot of money invested over there, and I just really I ran on, and I believe in engagement. So that's what kind of defines me. That's just a little bit about me.
Love it. All right, you're up.
All right, so I'm Elisa Hoffman, also here in Cincinnati, and I was an elected member of our school board. So I was elected in 2013 and served a term starting in 2014. That's when I came up with the idea for School Board School, which Kareem just mentioned. And so at School Board School, what we do is we bring together aspiring school board members, so people who think they may want to run for school board someday, and education advocates. So all those other people, probably like many of you who joined this panel today, who care deeply about education in your community, teachers, parents, nonprofit leaders, and volunteers, all those folks, bring them together, and we have really formed this diverse, informed coalition of people who are now working from inside the school system and outside the school system to push for change.
I love that. Tell us a little bit. School boards, most people don't know what they do, what the role is, how they operate. You have incredible resources, which I'm going to put in the chat in 1 second. You have incredible resources on your website under the public resources page that have videos and one-pagers and everything you could possibly need to learn more about school boards, what their roles are. But really briefly, just tell us, what are the job responsibilities? What does a school board do?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Kate, for putting that in the chat. So yeah, if you just go to schoolboardschool.org, you'll see on our public resources page a whole bunch of stuff to help clarify this. But kind of big picture, a couple of things I want people to really understand. Number 1, school board members are supposed to be the voice of the community. They represent the community. So one way we talk about this in school board school is if you picture an org chart, the community is at the top, and then the school board, and then there's the superintendent, treasurer, and all the other district staff members, school staff members. And so when you're picturing that, we really want you to think about the school board as community 1 step down, not administration 1 step up. So that means that they are the voice of the community. They are not the management of the district. So that's really important for people to understand, first of all. Then in terms of their duties, their role, their job, like what do they actually do? They are about governance, right? So they're about governance. Your superintendent and district administrators are about management, day-to-day operations. So your school board members are not in the weeds. So in terms of governance, the 2 biggest things are policy and finances. So your school board members are writing and amending policy. They are ensuring they are good stewards of taxpayer dollars. And then the other really important role they have is that they hire and evaluate the superintendent, and then in lots of districts, also the treasurer. And that is critical. That is, the CEO of your entire district. And so that decision of who that person is and holding them accountable to outcomes is another really critical role. And I think one thing that we really want to also make sure people understand is ultimately a school board member's job is about student outcomes. So the policy that they're writing, how they're approving dollars to be spent should all be for the purpose of ensuring that every kid has what they need in order to be successful when they leave your district.
Oh, that's perfect. I love that. Kareem, as a current school board member, you tell us what the day-to-day is like. She just kind of gave us that org chart overview. What is the day-to-day of a school board member like?
Wow. Okay. So we in Ohio, we are school board members only make $5,000 a year. So it's not a full-time position where we are really, we do have an office at the district, but we don't have like a salary that would enable us to really be there full-time, although many of us are fully engaged.
Yeah.
So for me, if it's a typical, we have committee meetings. Each board member this particular year sits on 2 committees, and then we have board meetings, which we call business meetings, where we do the work of the board. And so my particular meetings are policy and student health and safety. And so this particular time, the work gets done in the committee meetings. And so we are working with staff to answer any questions that we may have about the application of policies. How are things working? What are we hearing? What are some of the numbers? How can maybe the policies be adjusted or maybe even developed if we have to do those sorts of things? But that work gets done in committee, and then it gets presented to the board meetings during the business meeting as our recommendations and working with the administration on what we are recommending, whether it be a policy change or a policy enactment, or maybe, hey, we all need to think about this because this is not necessarily something that we need to change, but this is something that we need to be aware of. And we are charged with knowing everything that goes on within our district, not necessarily doing the work, but we should all be aware of all of the things that are going on. So that's the time when the small group of committee members can do the work and then inform the board of what goes on. So it gets kind of interesting on most months, I would say. So when you ask for a typical day, I don't think a typical day is even possible. But I like to engage, and I like to make sure that I think that it's super important for board members to connect with the community, but also the staff. We need to make sure that not to do the work, but to make sure everybody is okay, and that what can we do on a board level to help with whatever it is that's going on within the district. So I think it's just important to be aware.
I love that you use the word staff because it's more than just teachers. Our teachers are the backbone of our schools, and I could spend another 6 hours just talking about the importance, incredible role that teachers play. But so often we don't talk about the other people, the administrators, the janitors, the those that are making lunches, those that are driving the school buses to and from, right? It's so much more than the teachers. And I think that when I've had conversations with folks about school boards, it's school board's teacher, school board's teacher. And I think, language is important and it matters, as I say this to educators. Oops. It is the words that we use matter, and I think it's whether it's staff or team or however we use that to be more expansive beyond just teachers, because it impacts everyone, right? That whole ecosystem, if you will. And so I love that you use that instead of just teachers. You guys have been on the front lines for a long time. You've been school board members, you've been organizing, you've been in the community, you've been caretakers, you've been kind of all these roles and all these hats. Where have you seen progress? Where are you seeing, or are there examples that you can share with us of progress that you were part of or seeing in your own community?
Yeah, so I can jump in here too with a couple of quick examples. I know Kareem's got some as well. And so I think a couple of things come to mind right away. I think one is really understanding that one of my mentors said to me when I started on the school board, she was like, Elisa, remember, every school board picks up the work of the previous school board, right? And so a local government, any kind of, it's a long game. And so I think understanding that, one of the kind of big things that we did during my term is we wrote and passed one of the first equity policies in the country. And that was fantastic. And I think Kareem will talk about that a little bit more too. But I also want to be clear that like we were at the first board talking about equity, right? Like boards for years before us had been talking about equity, had been working purposefully to build more equitable opportunities and access for kids in our district. We picked that up, and during our term, we're able to go deeper in this specific way around codifying what our district defines as equity, and why that's important for our district. And so that's one example. I mean, another example that might be even more relevant to this group here in terms of like, what can you do, is around high school start times. And so my first year on the board, the American Pediatric Association came out with this study that it was like, you know, it was everything that they said about high school start times. All the research was showing that, you know, later high school start times helped everything from kids' mental health, their physical health, less car crashes, you know, their grades, all of this. And so I, at a meeting, like Kareem just said, we have these committees who do the work. I said I would like to assign this to our Student Achievement Committee to look into. So I will say I was one of 7 board members, and it sat on the work plan for that committee for years. It never made it onto an agenda. When parents in our district organized, and that's why I think this example is helpful for this audience, parents organized around wanting to move high school start times later because of this same research. That is when it made an agenda. Those parents were relentless. They were such effective advocates. They didn't just show up once. We knew they were coming to every meeting. They would send research to the Student Achievement Committee, CC all of our board members. They did a bunch of outreach to make sure the first group of parents across and caregivers across the district advocating for this. And it was only when those parents really pushed for it that it made it to a committee meeting. And then from there, that committee assigned it to our administration to do the community engagement, to bring Metro to the table, because our high schools are actually 7th to 12th grade schools, and those kids ride our city Metro bus. So we had to make sure that they were at the table. And once all of those entities were together, we were able to make that change.
All the pieces. That it's a puzzle. It's a puzzle that all the pieces were. I mean, we've talked about this in many sessions today. Of this isn't silo work, right? This is communities working together in collaboration. Kareem, I want to give you a minute to jump in and weigh in, possibly in the policy piece of that. Where are you seeing or have seen progress?
So that Elisa did a great job, as she would, on explaining the historical.
You're like, I'm good.
Because I just believe that I say the village, but I mean that from youngest to current to oldest, in that it really is not siloed. I can come into the board and rah hoo hoo that I'm here, but the work, I have to stay in constant contact with those before me to even understand the context of how what I am working with currently is applicable. And so and then we have societal things like a pandemic that come and upset everything. And so I think Elisa talked about start times, and that's so significant. And our equity policy are just 2 of the things that I think are super, super powerful and that stand the test of time. But when I say our start times, that is even being questioned now. As much work that was done there to bring that to what we currently have, that is now, with the pandemic and the shortage of drivers, being impacted on the ability to maintain those start times. Even though we know the research is evident, it was significant, it's still relevant, but now society has changed. And so we still have to really reach back and look at the historical context to be able to make decisions moving forward. And so I think that those are just 2 policies. Our equity policy is transcend, is just innovative, it's creative across the nation. CPS is known for this equity policy, our anti-racism policy, and almost, well, I won't say almost all, a lot of the policies that we are talking about now, as we review what are relevant, we tie them back to the equity policy. So, and that was not done on my watch, that was done before me. And so, again, I just think that if you're really being honest, school board members, while they may come in and out, the goal is still consistent, to educate children and to provide a high quality education. And so as long as that is still the goal, the policies may change, the relevancy of some policies, and they may just have to be rewritten. But those are just two examples of work that's been done and that's currently being done that has to just evolve.
Yeah. Let's switch to kind of a different piece of this. You and I, or the three of us, talked about this the other day in, again, I think this stat is from 2019, but there's about a 5 to 10% approximately of eligible voters that participate and vote in school board races, right? And we know that there are barriers to participation that we aren't going to discuss today. We know there are structural and systemic barriers. There are also just common sense barriers of having school board races at the same time as other elections, or not in the middle of the summer when everyone's out on vacation, right? There's things that can happen. But with low participation, as we know, we see polarization, right, of school boards, and we see certain demographics vote and others don't. Kareem, I'll start with you. I want to ask you both this, but what areas do we, let me say one other thing before I ask this question. We also know that lack of information is part of the reason that people don't participate, right? There's not enough accessible information on school boards, and in a way that people understand and meets people where they are, and is inviting. So where do you see the most need for education and knowledge sharing around school boards and communities, so that we can increase voter turnout in these races? And there's a second part to that question, but let me ask you that first.
So where I see the most need is on awareness and education on, first of all, what does a school board do? People have a misnomer about what the role of a school board member is. And I did a Google search a couple of months ago, and it said, oh, since Ohio school board members average $74,000 a year. And I thought, where did they get that from? Because that is really, really a farce. But I think that there needs to be more education on what the role of a school board member is. And in that education, people need to see themselves. If you do not have any students in CPS, and let's say you're a grandmother or a great grandmother and your grandkids don't live here, your kids don't live here, you would think that you don't have any role in the going on of Cincinnati Public, but you absolutely do. If you are a property tax owner, our levies directly impact you. If you go to the grocery store, if you engage in any type of commerce, you engage with a potential CPS student. And so we need to not only bring awareness to the fact that Cincinnati public schools, in our case, but public education impacts every person, whether that be the retiree or the parent or just the college student or even the single parent. It's just every person is impacted by what goes on within our public schools. So I think awareness is key. I will also say I'm a different type of school board member, and I have friends that are also different types of school board members. I think that it is partly my responsibility to be in the community where the community finds themselves so that I can hear what's going on. And it's a different type of mentality of me being where you are to find out information versus me giving the information and you finding it. And I think that's kind of an old way to think that, oh, well, we posted it on the website or we sent a flyer, and it's like, well, I'm going to be at the park with you, and I'm going to actually ask you and actually invite you to come to meetings. So I think it's education, it's awareness and education, but it's also engagement. People don't think that engagement is truly a verb. So I think we need to do better with getting the information of what the school board does out in the community. What is our role and our responsibility? And then informing people of what their power is, because they really, as Lisa alluded to, they have so much power. The community has power. The school board members only have 3 employees, and we need to hold them accountable for what they do. And part of that accountability is in people holding us accountable for what we do as well.
Lisa, I'm going to give you the second part. Oh, sorry, go ahead. I was going to give you the second part of that question, but I'll let you chime in first.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, I love how Kareem put this too. And I think we hear that often of like, well, I don't even have kids in the district, right? And like, my response is maybe a little too flip, Kate, but my response is often like, well, I've never had to use the fire department, but I still think it's a good idea to have for people who need it, right? Like these are public services. I don't drive on every road in our city, but I think there should be roads for everybody else to drive on too, right? And so like, these are public services. So even if your kids aren't there, you should understand that like we need an educated electorate. And I'll just say like, there are often places like the League of Women Voters usually does a candidate guide. There's another organization called Ballot Ready that is fantastic. And they have literally what your ballot is going to be for, I mean, thousands of districts around the country. So you definitely check them out. And then, you know, just like I heard the panel before talking, one of the things that I think is so relevant here as well is that like, if there's not one in your community, make one. So, I mean, I think that's like, I think often constituents think that they don't know enough when like you are a constituent. That is all that you need in order, like that's the only qualification you need to put together a forum or a guide. And so I think like, you know, in the year Kareem was running at school board school, we realized there weren't that many school board candidate forums because our school board elections are at the same time as city council and mayor during the two-year term when she was running. And so they get drowned out by the noise of these, you know, citywide, you know, other citywide roles. And so we said, well, we think this is really important. And so at school board school, we like beat this idea of coalition. Like we do everything better when we are in broad, diverse coalitions. So we brought like 6 other nonprofits in our community together. We came up with the questions we thought were important and sent them out to all the candidates and created a guide that's literally just like their answers. You don't edit it, you tell them, we're putting this in exactly as you write it, their answers. And then we held a candidate forum, again, in partnership with these other organizations. It's the highest attended candidate forum in our community's history, right? Like people want this if you give it to them. And so it's not, you know, super complicated to do. It can be, you know, in your community center's basement or in a room at your library where you invite a couple of candidates, you have good questions, and then you spread the word. And so I really, really want to emphasize, like, if there's not one happening, you have the power to make that happen.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And that's actually a great segue into to what I was going to ask you is, you know, I hear from a lot of folks, well, I see my candidates or I've gone and downloaded my ballot from whatever, you know, Ballot Ready is incredible. I love what they've built, wherever they're finding it, right? But like, how am I supposed to know whether this person's qualified? Like I kind of know what their job is. I've gotten that far, but like, how do I'm not an HR professional. How do I qualify as candidate? And so I wanted to ask you, you know, when folks are now, we've got a bunch of elections coming up, but obviously school board elections happen all year round. What should folks be thinking about in terms of vetting candidates and what qualifications are important? And even more so to empower people to make their own if it doesn't exist, right? Or work with other people. What kind of questions should they be asking or action should they be taking?
Yeah, I love that question, Kate. So I'll give a couple of my ideas. I know Kareem's got some thoughts here too. I would also say, again, like if you go to our website to that public resources page, there's a document called the 8 Characteristics of Effective Boards. If you check that out, you can then, you know, see what are those things that distinguish the most effective boards and board members from others who aren't as effective, and obviously direct your questions and how you're thinking about your candidates that way. I'd say a couple of kind of quick things that come to mind. I think the first thing is like when I talk with my own children during election season of where we are voting for, my husband and I are voting for, we always talk about how like you are never going to have a candidate you agree with on everything, right? Like that's not the bar that I have to agree with every position you take. What we look for is a couple of things. We look for candidates whose values we align with and who on the campaign trail, as they're being asked questions, as they talk about the positions they're holding and why, that they have developed those positions based on, you know, a deliberative process where they've really taken in information and they've thought it through, so that I know that even if I don't agree with them, they're actually really thoughtful in how they're coming to a decision. So I think those things are important as you're looking for candidates. I think there's kind of this misunderstanding that like you have to have a deep education background. And the research shows that that's actually not the case, that like people with education backgrounds don't actually make better school board members. I will say that with a caveat that you gotta have somebody on your board who deeply understands education. Like, you just have to. But not all 5, 7, or 9 people have to be educators. It's actually really important that you have a diversity of professions and careers, because people are trained to problem solve differently as engineers or as social workers than as educators. And so having that diversity of perspectives, just like in any, committee or leadership group, you want people with diverse backgrounds. So that's interesting to think about as well. And then I'd say 2 other quick things. One is what they're saying they're going to do actually in the role of a school board member? I can't tell you how many school board members I talk with where I'm like, I hear you that our customer service isn't very responsive. So you need to apply to be a manager of the customer service department as a job. Like, that's not your, or they'll say like, we do too much testing. And I'll say, I would vote for you for state rep, right? Because like state rep gets to decide that, not a school board member. So do they know enough about the role to even know what their job is? And then the last thing I'll say is just like, when you're thinking about the questions to ask, what kind of experience do they have with the district? Have they volunteered? Are they a parent or caregiver? Like, what's their experience with the district and their interaction with the school board? So even just asking a basic question like, tell me in the last couple of school board meetings you've been to, what have you heard the board discussing that you really agree with and are excited to help accelerate? And is there anything you haven't agreed with that you would voice a different opinion on? And if they can't kind of tell you at a basic level, like, oh, I haven't been to any school board meetings. Like, you don't have to go to every single one, but like, if you haven't even been to any board meeting, I'm not sure you're ready to like jump in. As Kareem will tell you, there is no time for a learning curve. Like, day one, you are voting on things affecting thousands of kids. Like, you have to at least have some idea what they're discussing right now.
Or at least be honest about it and say, I actually haven't been, but here's my plan to go, and here's what I'm going to do to, get caught up to speed. At least have something, right? Kareem, what's your thought here?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Lisa shared. I would add to that you absolutely have to know something about the district beyond what you've read on the website. And I think that is just super important. You don't have to know every acronym from an education standpoint, but you should well understand, how we got to magnet schools and and how this particular school, why we're not doing the lottery this way anymore. And I just think that there's some things that it's been my experience that you just should know. You should definitely be a good listener. And I have had to say this to my colleagues. I don't come into any meeting 100% under my opinion. I think the time for deliberation is super important. I value that time to be able to listen to my colleagues and tell me their perception on where we are from a historical perception, and then where they think we are. I don't even come to a meeting, I think it's 75%. I come into a meeting like I'm 60% here, and I'm always able to be swayed one way or the other. And so I think you have to be a good listener. You need to be not hell-bent on your perspective. And you can tell that when a person is running. If they're very adamant that they're going to do this, and they've said that 4 times, then they're not going to change. They're pretty consistent, and they're going to be a very hard to work with person. And then you also have to recognize that the group that you have for 2 years has a wonderful person, or it has a personality, and then it's going to change. It has the potential to change. And so you could get people who are very, very popular, but not very informed, and are not very, very good listeners, but they've got popularity, and then they're able to maybe do things that previous board wouldn't have done in that way. So it's being flexible is something that I would absolutely say needs to be there. But you can tell those things based on the personality and the interaction. I would even say I've had people come to multiple forums that I've been at because they wanted to, they were like interviewing me, and they wanted to see how I reacted at the NAACP forum. They wanted to see how I reacted with the Jewish community. They wanted to see how I reacted with the women, because they wanted to see if my responses were consistent and if my temperament was consistent. And that's what they said. I've had my dissertation pulled before I ran for office. It had only been like 20 times. That was probably me and my mom and my family. And it was pulled 400 plus times when I ran for office.
That's unbelievable.
Because people really do interview you, and they want to see how you think. And historically, my Facebook had someone said, I went back to the beginning of your Facebook history. And, well, I wouldn't do that. The bottom line is that people really do look at how have you been over time? Were you kind of a rah-rah person, and then all of a sudden you found some spirituality and now you're better?
They're rah-rahing something else.
You have to just kind of look at the person. And then other thing I would say is look at how people are once they're in office. I had a really wonderful lady tell me, I went to the Avondale Community Day, and she says, "Are you running for office? Didn't we vote for you?" I said, "Yeah, you did." She goes, you're still out here engaging." That makes a difference when people still see you, and they don't have to see you. They see you, and you're still asking questions about how are things going. It doesn't have to be that you should be maybe at 100%, but you're interested. You're attending events. You're trying to be a connector, not just for the Facebook post, but you're actually taking questions back. So I think it's a process. I think people need to see themselves in the process. They need to understand, like, oh, okay, you're not just here for that. Trust the people when they say that. But if a person has come out and they've been very, very charismatic about a particular issue, you need to kind of believe that that's what they're going to advocate for when they get elected.
Yeah. That's actually, we got a bunch of questions for this panel because I know it's a Saturday and a lot of parents wanted to participate, but rightfully so, have kids. And I appreciate you guys being here with us today. So some folks sent some questions ahead of time saying they weren't gonna be able to join, but we will be sharing this with them. The first question I want to ask is about accountability. So someone had asked, well, how do we keep our school board members accountable? And I think, you touched on that a little bit in terms of it doesn't, the election's November 8th. It doesn't just end November 9th and you're like, okay, see you later, right? What advice would you have for folks to be holding our school board members accountable, that we know we have them, good, bad, or ugly, for the next 2 years, 4 years, whatever their term is?
Is that for me?
Sure.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say this. I get lots of emails, and I return every email that's sent to me. That tends to be problematic for my fellow board members, because if you send me an email, now it might take me a week or two, but I return emails. I think that that's the start. And I also think that accountability is multifaceted in that while you ask me a question, I give you the answer. We are working as a team to ensure that that the response is implemented, if you will. But the school board's role, if you send me an email and say, let's say transportation, because that tends to be a very big topic at the moment, but you send me an email about transportation, I send it to, I include the superintendent on the response, and it is my responsibility to hold her accountable for the result. And so if that doesn't get resolved, I think the constituent should email us back and say, hey, you know what, we talked about this 2 weeks ago and it never got better. That's the accountability that I'm looking for. And then I, again, will bring the superintendent back into the conversation to say, hey, this parent emailed me and said that this is not working. And so that's how I believe that board members should be held accountable with regard to knowing what's going on, and then ensuring that the superintendent is able to be aware of what's going on, but then she can inform her team of who she needs to fix the issue. That's kind of one aspect. I think from the school board members' perspective, we got to be there. So we like to visit schools. I go wherever I'm invited. So when I'm invited to attend events, it was just at Fairview on Friday. I like to pop in, even if it's only for 10 minutes, to see the kids. I like the littles. I like them sometimes better than adults. But that's how we can kind of stay abreast on things that are going on. And I'll even just give you like a small little example. One of our schools, Cans, doesn't have a sign. We saw that with our own eyes. Like, they don't have any outdoor signage. We need that. And so as a board member, we can help advocate for things that we see, because we're there, that these things need to be fixed or they need to be addressed. So,
I love that. We had another question. We've talked about low participation in races, obviously. What types of long-term impacts are we facing if we can't increase voter participation in local school board elections and diversify the electorate for these elections? Great question. Yeah. I know an educator sent this. I know who sent this. I know they're an educator, so I know. I've pinned this one.
Yeah, you know what they're going for here. So I'll jump in and start. And I know Kareem serving right now can help out here as well. So I think that I know that be the ones is nonpartisan. I also think we cannot be talking about school boards in our country right now if we don't acknowledge that the far right has had a very organized and effective campaign to take over school boards and organize to at the local level as well to cause chaos and disruption at school board meetings. And so across the country and right here in greater Cincinnati, we have seen in many of our suburban regions, these far right school boards now. And I think so much of that is I know we analyze the data, a lot of that is because of low voter turnout. And so I think there's a couple of kind of things that come to mind right away. So one is, like I was saying before, that school board members are supposed to be the voice of the community. They're supposed to represent the community. When we abdicate our responsibility for voting, we let other people decide who's going to be our school board members. Oftentimes, those far right school board members are not actually an accurate representation of the values of their school district. Mm-hmm. And so we are saying that's okay. That's okay if that's what happens in our district. I think there's other strategic things that happen too. So I know sometimes, like, if you looked at the total number of votes, so in some of our suburban districts, like the more level-headed school board members, there were too many of them running and they ended up splitting the vote. And that's how some of these far right folks got on there. And so there's some strategic work that has to happen in school board elections as well. But that low voter turnout can often lead to people being elected who don't actually represent the broader community. And in terms of like the long-term repercussions of that, I think, things like if, the person who submitted this is an educator, they'll tell you one of the things that we have started to see in a lot of these districts is we're seeing staff resigning. So especially teachers, because that job is so hard. I was a teacher for many years. Like, that is a hard job to do. And if you're in a district where you don't know if I teach this book or if I say this thing, or if I acknowledge that I'm gay and married to another woman, I could be fired or I could be sued, right? Like, if that's the world you're living in as a teacher, why would you teach in that district? You're going to go teach somewhere else. And so there are, real immediate impacts. There's also these longer term impacts, right? Of like, that school board is going to be in place for, 2, 3, 4, et cetera, years. And if they're changing curriculum so that, kids aren't learning an accurate history, they're not reading novels about experiences other than their own, then that's impacting the kids' education. So it might be only a blip for us in kind of the long history of school boards. It could be 2, 3, 4 years, but kids only have one shot at 5th grade or one shot at sophomores in high school. And if they are missing key parts of a curriculum, then over the long term, we're turning kids out who don't have the kind of education they need to actually be citizens who understand, perspectives other than their own or, a small fraction of our country's history. And so there are real short-term and also long-term implications.
I think, that also touches a little bit on what we talked about earlier in that, the folks that say, well, I don't have kids, so it doesn't matter, like school board doesn't impact me, right? And to your point, they get one shot at school. And yes, there's the curriculum and there's history and all of the things they're learning, but they're also learning the skills, right? Socialization skills, negotiation skills, communication, collaboration. And, I think about this for those that say, well, I don't have kids or it doesn't impact me in what sense? Well, you're still part of the community, and those kids are at some point are going to be your employees, your boss, running your programs, the one that are building your soccer field. So if they don't have the skills to do that, the health of your community is at risk. And so I think, that really is something to think about beyond just the curriculum aspect. This isn't just they're not going to graduate 6th grade, 7th grade. This is long-term sustainability and health of our communities.
Yeah, and I think to that point too, I think we've seen this in our community. We've seen this across the country that passing resolutions that you can't, equity is no longer something we can say, right? But even in some of these communities, but even that you can't disaggregate data to analyze data by things like race. So if we're now saying you can't do that, so we also know it's true that, for example, kids of color, Black kids and Latina kids in particular are over-disciplined. Again, the long-term repercussions of that in terms of then what does that lead to in terms of, every time a kid is disciplined leading to this like higher chance of them dropping out of school. So if we can't look at that data and then pinpoint a solution to that, that's just one aspect. So whether it's, discipline disproportionality, if we can't look at our teaching force and look at that and break that down by race, then we can't actually set goals in order to have our teaching force better reflect the diversity of the kids in a district. And there's a whole other body of research out there that actually shows how important it is for every kid to have a diversity of teachers in front of them in the classroom, but especially that kids of color see themselves in their teaching force. Like, we know that there's research showing this stuff's important. And what's happening right now, to your point, Kate, is having these long-term repercussions because we can't even do the work that we know needs to happen in order to make sure our kids are getting what they need, so that not just globally they all get what they need, but that when we're looking at subgroups of kids, that each of those subgroups is getting what they need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I could talk this all night long, but we're wrapping up. I'm going to wrap this up because I know we've all got, big wild Saturday night plans, I'm sure. But I do love to end these conversations with actions, because the dialogue and story sharing and conversations are important, but they don't go anywhere unless we take actions. And that is to all of us in every community, regardless of where you live, and regardless if you have a school board meeting. Yes, you should go to school board meeting too, but if you have a school board race on the ballot this year, I'd love for you to share, each of you, one or two, one's fine too if you're feeling wild, one or two actions that people can take in their own communities. I'll let you guys decide who goes first.
Lisa, you can go first, Lisa.
Great. I like that we were both like, you go first. Yeah, so I think this is going along with the theme I've been saying all along, is organize, organize, organize. I think a lot of folks think that's much more complicated than it is. Like, when we say organize, we mean like start by just inviting 5 friends over to your house and have pizza and ask them, what do you think the 2 biggest issues are in our school district right now? And have a great conversation about it, end up with those 2 big things, and say, great, let's meet next week, and everybody bring 2 friends with you. Now those 5 people are bringing 2 more people, and now you've got an even larger group. And at that meeting, you say, hey, so we think, our 3rd grade reading scores is one of the biggest problems, and we have got to get a new junior high gym. It is falling apart. We think those are the 2 biggest things. And now you organize around those 2 issues. You say, like, who's going to speak at the school board meeting? Who's going to write an email? You really are very tactical about what are those things. And then you have to keep showing up. I think, like Kareem and I were talking about earlier, this stuff doesn't happen because you came to one meeting and said it. Like, you have to keep showing up. So when we say organize, like organize and advocate, like the advocacy part, like you have to keep advocating. Do not start talking about 15 other things that are also a problem in your district. Stick with those 2 things until you get to this resolution. And I think, as we say in School Board School all the time, as individuals, you can each have a positive impact, but individuals don't change systems. It's diverse networks and coalitions working together that actually change systems. And so that's why it's so important that you organize. And then the other thing I'd say from that is, like, once you get these people activated and interested, figure out who's going to run. So I get so frustrated when I hear about all these school board races where they're uncontested. At least make people work for it, right? And so figure out in that group, like, which of you is going to run, and then, support the heck out of that person so that they get elected. And I'll say, I think Kareem will back me up on this one, don't abandon them once you've elected them. Like, they need you, like, not just on the campaign trail, but they need you once they're in that seat, right? So, like, I was a parent of young kids when I was a school board member. Like, I still needed help with, like, could somebody just drop off dinner? Could somebody babysit my kids? Because, like Kareem said, like, we only could make a maximum of $5,000, which meant I paid more in childcare than I actually made to be a school board member. Like, can you just help in those, like, human ways? But can you also help by, like, showing up at the mic and saying, like, board member Moffett just talked about X, Y, and Z as a constituent. I want to thank her for bringing that up. I support that, etc. Right? Like, show up for them at the mic, because hopefully you're electing people who are going to be pushing for change. And when you push against the status quo pushes back really hard. So you need to have that same organized group that got the person elected to show up for them once they are elected.
Yeah, yes, all of that times 10 with a megaphone.
No, I very rarely disagree with what Elisa shares as far as that goes, because I think we have one mind on that. I will just say people will usually, the reasons to me, the reasons why people don't engage in voting and engage with their school boards, just those two examples, is because they don't feel either welcome or they don't see themselves in those systems. And so, or they don't think that their voice matters. And so I think awareness for information is just the key. Find out who your local school board members are, and your goal should not necessarily be to run, because that's not everybody's goal, and it's a very arduous task. So only I don't know if I would do it again, because it's just super hard and very time consuming mentally. But everyone having a high quality and equitable education is where we all land. Every one of us, no matter if you are a part of our custodial team or you are just someone who is a business owner, everyone wants students to graduate and be able to be gainfully employed. And that is our awareness. That is our unity right there. That's our affinity. And so find out who your school board members are, reach out to them, ignite some interest, some interest along that alignment where we share that I want to make a difference. I want to see if I can help. I want to just know. It doesn't always have to be, sometimes knowing is the action. So it doesn't have to always be that you have to do something, but find out who they are, ignite that information, ignite that awareness. And then I would say engage with them on some level. I would be hard pressed to find a school board member and or city council person, but particularly school board member, that would not meet you for coffee, or that would not engage with you on an email, or that would not, after a school board meeting, love to be introduced to you if you do happen to come. I just think that those things, those awareness for information, igniting your passion, and then engaging on some level are just things everybody can do, whether you're retired, whether you are a teacher or just a regular high school student. Everyone, we have that alignment. And I think that is the invitation to getting people motivated to voting, because it matters. That is the invitation to getting people to start being aware of what's going on around them. If you see, we always tell our kids, if you see something, say something. But the reality of it is, people are not saying things. They're not engaging because they don't see that it impacts them. And I'm telling everybody, it impacts you on some level every single day. And it is our responsibility. And there are things that everybody can do. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to have a big title. You don't have to make a lot of money. You don't even have to volunteer, but you can be aware of what's going on. And so that's the one thing. I get people that email me after board meetings because they watch them. They email me or they text me and say, you know what, I thank you for trying. Thank you for trying to work on student voice. Thank you. I am one of 7 votes. I wish I could go in there and make everybody think the way that I think, but they don't. And that's actually a good thing.
That's good.
If they don't, and I try something and it doesn't work, then it's nice to know that people are watching and that they are actually seeing my effort, because that's what matters. So when Lisa says, don't leave me, that's one way that you don't have to leave your elected officials. People don't really realize that school board members run a race like city council members. I mean, we actually get elected. We have got to fundraise. We've got to go to community forums. We do all that stuff. And then I think systemically, we don't hold school board members on the same level as city council members. So it's a shift in how we need to think. But at the very least, we all align that every one of our students should graduate 100%. And be able to be gainfully employed. So that's where we start.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for being with us and sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge and experience and stories with us. I know I probably say this, that everyone is with us today and that we'll be watching this. I feel like we could have this conversation all day and just, keep going. But the good news is that whoever is watching and listening, you don't necessarily have to do it with us. You can do it with your own people in your community. Exactly what we just did. Take this and replicate this in your community, whether it's your neighbors, your friends, your family. Earlier today, in the 2 o'clock panel, I encouraged people to reach out to someone that you typically would not reach out to about reproductive justice and have that uncomfortable conversation with them. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm excited to continuing our conversations and championing all that you're doing. And thank you to all the school board members, all of the staff, including teachers, and all the administrators that make our communities safer, stronger, and happier. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.